The rain fell in sheets, a gray curtain that blurred the edges of the world and turned the city of Oakhaven into a watercolor painting of sorrow. For Leo Vance, the rain was not just weather. It was a mood, a constant, weeping companion to the grief that had hollowed out his life for the past 2 years. Every drop that struck the cracked pavement seemed to echo the relentless ache in his chest, a heart that had been shattered on a sunlit afternoon and had never quite learned how to beat properly again. He pulled the thin collar of his jacket tighter around his neck, the damp chill seeping into his bones, a physical manifestation of the cold that lived inside him now. Beside him, his 6-year-old son, Noah, held his hand, a small, warm anchor in the vast, cold ocean of Leo's despair. Noah's bright red boots, a size too big and bought secondhand, splashed in a puddle, the cheerful sound a stark contrast to his father's silence. They were on their way home from the grocery store, their single bag containing the bare essentials, a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, some pasta, and a small, dented can of tomato sauce. It was all Leo could afford until his next temp job started, assuming it started at all. The world of construction was fickle, and men with haunted eyes and a quiet, simmering sadness were not always the first to be chosen. He looked down at his son, whose small face was tilted up towards the sky, his mouth open to catch the raindrops. A ghost of a smile touched Leo's lips, a fleeting visitor that never stayed long. Noah was his reason, his only reason. He was a miniature version of Sarah, his late wife, with the same unruly chestnut curls and eyes the color of warm chocolate. Seeing him was both a blessing and a daily, gut-wrenching reminder of everything he had lost. Sarah was gone. The laughter that used to fill their tiny apartment was gone. The future they had so carefully mapped out together, full of dreams that now seemed like cruel fantasies, was gone. All that remained was this grinding, day-to-day survival, a life leached of all its color. As they turned the corner onto their street, a row of tired-looking buildings that all seemed to be sighing in the rain, Leo saw it. A small splash of pink against the grim gray of an alleyway entrance. At first, he thought it was a discarded toy or a piece of trash, but then the pink splash moved. It was a little girl, no older than Noah, wearing a bright pink raincoat that was thoroughly soaked. She was sitting on the wet ground, her small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Her knees were drawn up to her chest, and her face was buried in her hands. She looked utterly, terrifyingly alone. Leo's first instinct, born of 2 years of wanting to shut the world out, was to walk on by. He had his own child to worry about, his own bottomless well of problems. He didn't have the strength, the space, the anything to take on someone else's trouble. But then he looked at Noah, who had stopped walking and was staring at the little girl, his expression one of pure, childish concern. And in that moment, Leo saw not a stranger's problem, but a child. A lost, frightened child in the rain, the very image of vulnerability. The part of him that was a father, the part that Sarah had loved, overruled the part that was broken. He couldn't leave her there. It wasn't in him. He squeezed Noah's hand gently. "Stay right here for a second, buddy," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. He approached the little girl slowly, cautiously, as if she were a frightened deer. He crouched down, wincing as his worn-out jeans immediately soaked through. "Hey there," he said softly, keeping his voice as gentle as he could. "Are you okay? Are you lost?" The little girl lifted her head. Her face was streaked with tears and rain, her big blue eyes wide with fear. She had blonde hair, plastered to her forehead in wet strands. She hiccuped a sob and simply nodded, unable to speak. "What's your name?" Leo asked. She wiped her nose with the back of her sleeve. "Lily," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Lily," Leo repeated, the name feeling soft on his tongue. "That's a beautiful name. I'm Leo, and this is my son, Noah." He gestured back to Noah, who gave a small, shy wave. "We live just down the street. It's pretty cold and wet out here. How about you come with us, just for a little while, so you can get warm and dry? We can call for your mommy and daddy from there." Lily looked from Leo's kind, tired face to Noah's curious one. She seemed to hesitate, the warnings of strangers likely echoing in her mind. But then a loud clap of thunder boomed overhead, and she flinched, a fresh wave of tears welling in her eyes. The fear of the storm seemed to outweigh the fear of the man with the sad smile. She gave another tiny, jerky nod. Leo held out his hand. It was a calloused, rough hand, a hand that knew hard work and harder luck, but it was steady. After a long moment, Lily's small, cold fingers slipped into his. Her touch was like a spark, a flicker of warmth that traveled up his arm and settled somewhere deep inside his frozen chest. He stood up, now holding a child's hand in each of his own, and led them out of the rain, unaware that this simple act of kindness was a step onto a path that would lead him directly back to the heart of his own unresolved tragedy, a collision of past and present that was destined to either shatter him completely or, against all odds, begin to piece him back together. The apartment was small, the air thick with the scent of damp wool and the lingering ghost of yesterday's fried potatoes. To an outsider, it might have seemed bleak, with its peeling paint and furniture that bore the honorable scars of time and tight budgets. But as Leo ushered the two children inside, it became a sanctuary from the storm. The first thing he did was help Lily out of her soaked pink raincoat, hanging it on a hook by the door where it dripped a steady, rhythmic puddle onto the worn linoleum. Her dress underneath was also damp, and she was shivering, her teeth chattering softly. "Okay, first things first, let's get you into something dry," Leo said, his voice taking on a practical, parental tone he hadn't used with anyone but Noah for 2 long years. He looked at Noah. "Buddy, can you find one of your old sweatshirts for Lily? One of the small ones." Noah, his face serious with the importance of his mission, nodded and scurried off to his room, a tiny space he shared with his father, separated by a hanging sheet for a semblance of privacy. While Noah was gone, Leo knelt in front of Lily again. "Don't you worry, Lily. We're going to find your mom. She's probably looking for you right now, very worried." He tried to offer a reassuring smile, but he could feel the strain of it on his face. Worry was a language he knew all too well. Lily just looked at him with those enormous, swimming blue eyes, still too scared to say much more than a whisper. Noah returned, holding up a faded yellow sweatshirt with a cartoon dinosaur on the front. It was old and soft from 100 washings. "This one, Papa," he said proudly. "It has a stegosaurus. That's a friendly dinosaur." Leo took the sweatshirt. "Perfect choice, bud." He helped Lily pull her damp dress over her head and slipped the warm, dry sweatshirt on her. It was far too big, the sleeves hanging down past her hands and the hem reaching her knees, making her look even smaller and more fragile. But she instantly stopped shivering, burrowing her face into the soft fleece for a moment. A tiny sigh of relief escaped her lips. "There, that's better, isn't it?" Leo said, his heart clenching with a strange mix of pity and affection. He led her to the small, lumpy sofa and sat her down, tucking a faded afghan around her legs. Noah, unprompted, climbed up beside her, sitting a respectful distance away but close enough to be a comforting presence. He held out his own worn stuffed bear, a one-eyed creature named Barnaby. "You can hold Barnaby if you want," Noah offered. "He's very brave in storms." Lily looked at the bear, then at Noah's earnest face, and slowly, she reached out and took it, hugging it to her chest. It was the first voluntary action she'd made since taking Leo's hand. Leo watched the two of them, a quiet tableau on his worn-out sofa, and felt a profound shift in the atmosphere of the room. For 2 years, this apartment had been a container for his grief. It was quiet, stagnant, heavy. Now, with the addition of this small, lost girl, a different kind of energy filled the space. It was still quiet, but it was the quiet of anticipation, of care, not of despair. The silence was punctuated by the gentle hum of the old refrigerator and the soft patter of the rain against the window pane. He went into the kitchen, a tiny alcove off the main room, and put a kettle on the stove. Hot chocolate. That's what Sarah would have done. She had a special talent for making even the most difficult moments feel safe with small, loving gestures. The thought of her was a sharp pang, as always, but this time it was different. It wasn't just the pain of her absence. It was the memory of her warmth, a warmth he was now trying to replicate for this child. He made 3 mugs, using the last of the milk and the precious cocoa powder he saved for special occasions. He carried them back into the living room on a tray. He handed one to Noah, who took it with careful hands. He then placed the 3rd mug on the coffee table in front of Lily. "It's not too hot," he said. "Be careful, though." Lily looked down at the steaming mug, at the marshmallow he'd found in the back of the cupboard bobbing on the surface. She picked it up, her small hands wrapping around its warmth. She took a tiny, tentative sip. A little bit of color returned to her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It was the first time she had spoken to him with anything other than fear. "You're very welcome, Lily," Leo replied, his voice softer than he intended. He sat down in his own worn armchair, a throne of exhaustion, and watched the two children. They didn't talk, but a silent communication seemed to pass between them. Noah pointed to the dinosaur on the sweatshirt Lily was wearing and made a small, quiet roaring sound. Lily responded with a tiny, watery smile. It was the first smile he'd seen on her face, and it was like watching a flower bloom in slow motion. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was beautiful. In that moment, Leo felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't happiness, not yet. It was something quieter, more fundamental. It was purpose. For a brief, blessed hour, he wasn't just a grieving widower or a struggling father. He was a protector, a provider of warmth and hot chocolate. He was the safe harbor in a storm for two small ships, one of whom was his own, and the other a complete stranger. And as he sat there, listening to the rain and the quiet sipping of the children, he realized the silence in his heart had receded, just a little, replaced by the simple, profound sound of a child feeling safe. After the hot chocolate had worked its gentle magic, a fragile sense of calm settled over the small apartment. Lily, wrapped in the Afghan and clutching Noah's one-eyed bear, no longer looked like a terrified wild thing. The color had returned to her cheeks, and the fear in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet watchfulness. She seemed to be studying her surroundings, taking in the worn but clean room, the framed photo on the mantelpiece, the small stack of Noah's picture books on the floor. Leo knew he couldn't delay any longer. A mother was out there somewhere, frantic with worry. The thought sent a jolt of anxiety through him, a sympathetic echo of a parent's worst nightmare. He pulled his old, cracked smartphone from his pocket and dialed the non-emergency police line. His voice was steady as he explained the situation, giving his address and a description of the little girl he'd found. The dispatcher on the other end was professional and reassuring. She confirmed that a report for a missing child named Lily had just been filed in a neighborhood a few miles away. The mother had been at a park, had turned her back for a moment, and the girl was gone. A patrol car was on its way. They would be there soon. "Thank you," Leo said, ending the call. He turned to the children. "The police are on their way," he announced gently. "They're going to help you find your mommy, Lily." At the mention of her mother, Lily's lower lip began to tremble again. "I want my mommy," she said, her voice small and wobbly. Noah, with an empathy that always surprised Leo, slid a little closer to her on the sofa. "Don't be sad," he said. "My papa is good at finding things. He found my red car when it went under the fridge." The simple, earnest faith in his son's voice was a small, sharp knife to Leo's heart. He wished he was as capable as Noah believed him to be. To distract her, Leo decided to engage her in conversation. "So, Lily," he began, sitting on the edge of the coffee table. "That's a very nice pink coat you have. Is pink your favorite color?" Lily nodded, her blonde hair, now starting to dry in soft waves, bouncing slightly. "My mommy bought it for me. She says it's a happy color." "It is a happy color," Leo agreed. "And what about your mommy? What's she like?" He was hoping to get a name, a detail, anything that might help, but he was also just curious about the world this little girl had wandered from. Lily's face lit up for the first time, the memory of her mother a powerful beacon. "She's beautiful," she said, her voice gaining confidence. "She has hair like sunshine, and she gives the best hugs. And she sings songs to me at night, about stars and sleepy moons." The description was so pure, so full of love, that Leo felt a familiar ache. He glanced at the photograph on the mantelpiece. It was of him and Sarah, taken on their wedding day. Sarah, with her chestnut curls and her radiant smile, a smile that could light up a room. He used to be the one who sang Noah to sleep. He hadn't been able to bring himself to do it since she died. The songs were her songs, and his voice felt like a pale, broken echo of hers. "She sounds wonderful," Leo said, his own voice thick with emotion. He cleared his throat. "And does your mommy have a name?" "Isabella," Lily said proudly. "Her name is Isabella." The name meant nothing to him, just a name. He filed it away. They sat in a comfortable silence for a few more minutes, the spell of the storm outside and the warmth inside creating a strange, temporary bubble of peace. Noah, emboldened by Lily's newfound talkativeness, brought out his box of crayons and some paper. He and Lily sat on the floor, their heads bent close together, drawing. Noah was drawing a fierce, red T-Rex. Lily was drawing a large, smiling sun with a woman standing underneath it. A woman with long, yellow hair. Leo watched them, a feeling of deep, paternal warmth spreading through him. It felt so normal, so right, to have the sound of children's quiet play filling his home. It was a ghost of a life he had once taken for granted. He felt a pang of protectiveness for Lily that was fierce and immediate. He was her guardian, her temporary father, and he took the responsibility seriously. He found himself hoping her mother, Isabella, was a good woman, that she was worthy of the adoration in her daughter's voice. He hoped the world Lily would return to was as full of sunshine and songs as she described. The minutes ticked by, each one bringing the inevitable arrival of the police and the girl's mother closer. A part of him dreaded it, dreaded the end of this strange, peaceful interlude. He knew that once Lily was gone, the heavy silence would descend again, perhaps even heavier than before for having been briefly lifted. The apartment would feel emptier. The grief would rush back in to fill the space she had occupied. A knock on the door, firm and official, shattered the quiet. Leo's heart jumped. He stood up, his body tensing. This was it. He looked at Lily, who had scrambled to her feet, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and fear. That must be them, Leo said, forcing a calm he did not feel. He walked to the door and took a deep breath, preparing himself to hand this little girl back to her world and to return fully to his own. He turned the knob and pulled the door open, ready to face a grateful stranger. But the person standing on his doorstep was not a stranger at all. Standing in the dimly lit hallway, flanked by two uniformed police officers, was a woman whose face was seared into Leo's memory like a brand. It was a face he had seen countless times in his nightmares, a face that had stared out at him from newspaper clippings he had long since burned, but could never forget. Her hair was like sunshine, just as Lily had described, but to Leo, it was the color of blinding headlights. Her eyes, a startling shade of blue, were wide with relief and anxiety as they scanned the room, but to Leo, they were the eyes of the woman who had been in the other car. Isabella. The name Lily had spoken now echoed in his mind like a funeral bell. Isabella Sterling. The wife of Richard Sterling, the man who had been behind the wheel of the SUV that had run a red light on a bright Tuesday afternoon and collided with Sarah's small sedan. Richard Sterling had died in the crash, too, but that fact had never brought Leo a shred of comfort. All it meant was that the man who had stolen his future would never have to face his own. Leo froze. The air in his lungs turned to ice. His hand, still on the doorknob, felt disconnected from his body. The entire world seemed to tilt on its axis, the small, warm apartment suddenly feeling like a cage. Every sound faded away except for the frantic, panicked drumming of his own heart. "Mommy!" Lily's joyful shriek broke the spell. She darted past Leo and launched herself into her mother's arms. Isabella collapsed to her knees, heedless of the damp floor, and wrapped her daughter in a desperate, fierce hug. She buried her face in Lily's hair, her body shaking with profound relief. "Oh, Lily, my baby, my sweet girl," she sobbed, her voice muffled. "I was so scared. I was so scared." For a moment, all Leo could do was stare at the scene. The reunion of a mother and child, a scene that should have been heartwarming, felt like a dagger twisting in his gut. This woman was experiencing the relief of getting her child back, a relief he would never know. He would never get to hold Sarah again, never hear her voice, never see her smile. The injustice of it all, an emotion he had tried to bury under the weight of daily survival, rose up in him like bile. One of the police officers stepped forward, a kind-looking man with graying temples. "Mr. Vance? I'm Officer Miller. Thank you for calling this in. You did a good thing here, sir." Leo couldn't respond. He just nodded, his throat tight. His gaze was locked on Isabella Sterling. She was slowly standing up now, still holding Lily's hand in a grip that was both gentle and iron-tight. Her tear-filled eyes finally met his. There was no recognition in them, only a deep, swimming gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. I don't have the words. Thank you so much. We were at the park, and I just looked away for a second. I can't imagine what would have happened if you hadn't found her." He saw her reach into her expensive-looking handbag, her manicured fingers fumbling for her wallet. The gesture, so normal, so expected, sent a jolt of cold fury through him. Did she think she could pay him for this? Could she put a price on the act of kindness that had now turned into a cruel, cosmic joke? He felt a bitter, hysterical laugh bubbling up inside him, and he had to clamp his jaw shut to keep it from escaping. "It was nothing," he managed to say, the words sounding clipped and harsh, even to his own ears. He could feel Noah pressing against his leg, sensing the sudden, dangerous shift in his father's demeanor. Isabella paused, her hand hovering over her wallet. She looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time, and a flicker of confusion crossed her features. She saw not a kind stranger, but a man with eyes like burnt-out coals, a face etched with a pain so profound it seemed to radiate from him in waves. She saw the rigid set of his jaw, the white-knuckled grip he had on the doorframe. His hostility was a palpable thing, a wall of ice she had just walked into. Are you all right?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Leo couldn't speak. He just stared at her, and in his mind, he wasn't in his dim hallway anymore. He was back in that sterile, white hospital room, a doctor with a kind, sad face telling him that they had done everything they could. He was seeing the wreckage of Sarah's car on the evening news, a twisted metal coffin. He was seeing this woman's face in the society pages weeks later, the grieving, beautiful widow of a wealthy executive. And now, she was here, in his home, her daughter wearing his son's faded dinosaur sweatshirt. The universe, it seemed, had a sick and twisted sense of humor. He felt frozen in time, trapped in the impossible intersection of his most painful memory and his present reality. The woman whose family had been the cause of his life's destruction was standing in his doorway, thanking him for saving her child. And he, the grieving, poor single dad, had just offered a safe harbor to the daughter of his personal apocalypse. The air in the hallway crackled with a tense, unspoken energy. Isabella Sterling, a woman accustomed to navigating the world with grace and confidence, found herself at a complete loss. The man before her, the man who had saved her daughter, was looking at her with an expression she couldn't decipher, a chilling mixture of anguish and something that felt unnervingly like contempt. His silence was louder than any accusation. I'd like to compensate you for your trouble," she stammered, falling back on the only language she knew for situations that were beyond the realm of simple thank yous. Money. It was a tool, a solution, a bomb. She pulled a wad of cash from her wallet, a sum that was likely more than Leo saw in a month, and held it out to him. "Please, take this. For your time, for the kindness you've shown my daughter." Leo's eyes dropped to the money in her hand. He looked at the crisp $100 bills, and then his gaze lifted back to her face. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "I don't want your money," he said, his voice low and dangerously steady. Each word was a chip of ice. The rejection was so stark, so absolute, that Isabella physically recoiled, pulling her hand back as if she'd been burned. The two police officers exchanged a look. Officer Miller cleared his throat. "Well, everything seems to be in order here. Lily's safe, and that's the main thing." He was trying to diffuse the strange tension, to wrap up the encounter and move on. He smiled down at Lily. "You gave your mom quite a scare, young lady. You be sure to stick close to her from now on, okay?" Lily, still clinging to her mother's hand, nodded solemnly. "Mr. Leo gave me hot chocolate," she said to the officer. "And Noah let me hold Barnaby." Isabella looked from Lily's innocent face, still wearing the oversized sweatshirt, to Leo's shuttered one. The contrast was dizzying. She felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling that she was missing a crucial piece of a puzzle she didn't even know she was supposed to be solving. "Can we at least get her dress?" Isabella asked, her voice now much softer, more tentative. "It's just inside," Leo said, his tone flat. He stepped back stiffly, allowing her to enter, but he didn't move from his post by the door, guarding it like a sentinel. Isabella stepped into the small apartment, her expensive leather boots silent on the worn floor. The space was tiny, but it was clean. She saw the 2 mugs and the empty hot chocolate packets on the coffee table. She saw the crayons and the drawings on the floor. Her eyes landed on the photograph on the mantelpiece, the smiling woman with the warm, kind eyes. A sudden, inexplicable wave of sadness washed over her. The woman in the photo looked so happy, so full of life. She noticed the faint layer of dust on the frame. "Lily, sweetie, where's your dress?" Isabella asked, her voice a near whisper. Lily pointed to the bathroom door. "Mr. Leo put it in the warm, spinny thing to dry." "The dryer." "Of course." Isabella went to the small, rattling machine in the corner of the kitchen alcove and retrieved the dress. It was warm and soft. As she helped Lily change out of Noah's sweatshirt, she couldn't shake the feeling of being an intruder in a sacred, sorrowful place. She folded the dinosaur sweatshirt neatly, her movements precise and careful. She held it out to Leo. "Thank you for this," she said. "It was very kind." Leo took it from her, their fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. The contact was like an electric shock. He flinched, pulling his hand back quickly. That was the final straw for Isabella. This was more than just awkwardness or a man who was proud. This was personal. But how? She had never seen this man before in her life. She was sure of it. She took a deep breath. "I feel I've offended you somehow," she said, her voice direct but not unkind. "If I have, I am truly sorry. I'm just so grateful, and I don't know how to express it." Leo looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, the mask of ice cracked. She saw a flash of raw, unfiltered agony in his eyes, so profound it made her breath catch in her throat. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. "Just go," he said, the words barely a whisper. "Please." The plea was so full of pain that it silenced any further questions. Isabella knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that to press him further would be to cross a line into a place of immense suffering. She nodded, her own eyes now filling with confused tears. She took Lily's hand, gave a final, grateful nod to the police officers, and turned to leave. As she walked down the hallway, Lily twisted around. "Bye, Noah. Bye, Mr. Leo," she called out, her voice echoing in the quiet corridor. Noah, who had been silent this whole time, waved a small, sad goodbye. Leo didn't move. He just stood in the doorway and watched them go, watched the woman who was a living, breathing symbol of his life's greatest tragedy walk away with her daughter, her own life intact, her own family whole. When they were gone, he slowly, mechanically, closed the door. The click of the latch sounded like a cell door locking. He leaned his forehead against the cool wood, his eyes squeezed shut. The silence that rushed back in was suffocating. The warmth was gone. The purpose was gone. All that was left was the ghost of a little girl in a pink coat and the full, crushing weight of his past, which had just risen from its grave and looked him in the eye. Noah tugged on his pants. "Papa, are you sad?" Leo slid down the door until he was sitting on the floor, pulling his son into his lap. He hugged him tightly, burying his face in Noah's soft hair, and for the first time in 2 years, he let out a dry, ragged sob that had been lodged deep in his chest, a sound of pure, undiluted heartbreak. The days that followed the storm were gray and muted, mirroring the landscape of Leo's soul. The brief, strange interlude with Lily had disturbed the stagnant waters of his grief, and now the sediment was swirling, clouding everything. He went to his temp job at a new construction site, his movements mechanical, his mind 1,000 miles away. He lifted drywall, hammered nails, and spoke only when spoken to, a ghost in a hard hat. But at night, the silence in the apartment was a living entity. It was no longer the familiar, heavy blanket of sorrow he had grown accustomed to. It was an active, accusing void, a space that had been briefly filled with the sound of a little girl's chatter and was now painfully empty. Noah was the one who kept the memory of that afternoon alive. "When can we see Lily again?" he would ask at dinner, pushing his peas around his plate. "I want to show her my new drawing." Or at bedtime, he'd say, "Do you think Lily's mommy sings her the star song tonight?" Each question was a fresh turn of the knife for Leo. How could he explain to his son that the girl who had appeared like a little rain-soaked angel was inextricably linked to the demon of their family's past? How could he articulate a hatred so deep and complicated that it felt like a part of his own DNA? He couldn't. So he would just offer vague, non-committal answers. "I don't know, buddy. Maybe someday. Let's just focus on us for now." Meanwhile, in a sprawling, minimalist mansion on the other side of the city, a similar restlessness had taken hold. Isabella Sterling's home was a testament to wealth and taste, with its clean lines, museum-quality art, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a manicured, empty garden. but the house was as silent as a tomb. Since the day in the rain, Lily had become a small, insistent echo of the man with the haunted eyes. "Can we go see Mr. Leo?" she asked her nanny. "I miss Noah's bear, Barnaby." She drew pictures, not of smiling suns anymore, but of a man and a little boy standing in front of a small, crooked building. She left them on Isabella's desk, on her pillow, on the gleaming kitchen island. They were silent, crayon-drawn pleas. Isabella couldn't get the man out of her mind. His face, etched with that profound, bottomless sorrow, intruded on her thoughts during board meetings, during lonely dinners, during the long, sleepless hours of the night. His rejection of her money was a minor puzzle, but the raw pain in his eyes was a mystery that haunted her. It felt familiar, not his face, but the look. It was the same look she sometimes saw in her own reflection when she thought no one was watching. The look of someone irreparably broken by loss. Driven by a combination of Lily's persistence and her own gnawing curiosity, Isabella decided she had to do something. The pretense of a simple thank you was no longer enough. This felt deeper. She needed to understand. She found the dinosaur sweatshirt, still neatly folded in a bag in her car. It was her excuse. One sunny afternoon, she drove back to the tired-looking street, her luxury sedan looking conspicuously out of place among the dented, older cars. She found Leo and Noah at a small, scruffy park at the end of the block. Leo was sitting on a bench, staring into space, while Noah kicked a soccer ball against a chain-link fence by himself. Her heart ached at the sight. The loneliness of the two of them was a palpable thing. She got out of the car, holding the sweatshirt in a small, elegant gift bag. Lily was with her, her face lighting up the moment she saw Noah. "Noah," she squealed, running towards him. Noah's head snapped up, his face breaking into a wide, incredulous grin. "Lily!" He abandoned his ball and ran to meet her. They collided in a clumsy, joyful hug, two small magnets finding their counterparts. Leo was jolted from his reverie by the sound of Lily's voice. He looked up and saw Isabella approaching, and his entire body went rigid. A wave of cold dread washed over him. Why was she here? What did she want? "Mr. Vance," Isabella said, her voice soft. She stopped a few feet away, respecting his space. "Leo, please." "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice flat, devoid of any welcome. Lily wouldn't stop talking about Noah, she said, gesturing to the two children, who were already chattering away, completely absorbed in their own world. "And you left this. I wanted to return it." She held out the gift bag. He looked at it, then back at her, his expression unreadable. He didn't take it. "You could have thrown it away," he said. "I couldn't," she replied simply. "It wouldn't have felt right. It was a kindness." "It wasn't kindness," he snapped, the words sharper than he intended. "I would have done it for any lost kid." She flinched at his tone, but held her ground. "Still, thank you." She placed the bag on the bench between them. An awkward silence fell. The only sound was the happy shrieks of the children playing. Isabella decided to take a risk. "You look at me like you know me," she said quietly, "but I'm certain we've never met. Am I wrong?" Leo's gaze darkened. He stared at the children, at his son's happy, animated face as he showed Lily how to properly kick the ball. He saw a joy in Noah that he hadn't seen in months. It was a joy brought by this woman's daughter. The irony was suffocating. "We've never met," he said, his voice a low rumble. He finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were filled with a weary, ancient grief. "But I know who you are, Mrs. Sterling." The way he said her name, with a quiet, bitter emphasis, sent a chill down her spine. The puzzle pieces were beginning to click into place, forming a picture she wasn't sure she wanted to see. "How?" she whispered. Leo didn't answer right away. He just watched the children, a father watching his son experience a moment of pure, unadulterated happiness. And he knew, with a sinking heart, that this fragile connection between their children was a complication he was not equipped to handle. He finally tore his eyes away from the kids and looked at her. "You wouldn't remember," he said, his voice hollow. "It was a Tuesday, 2 years ago. Your husband and my wife." The moment Leo spoke those words, "your husband and my wife," the world seemed to stop spinning for Isabella. The cheerful sounds of the children playing faded into a distant hum. The warmth of the afternoon sun felt suddenly cold on her skin. A Tuesday, 2 years ago. There was only one Tuesday 2 years ago that mattered, a day that had cleaved her life into a before and an after. The day of the accident. The day her husband, Richard, had died. The day she became a widow. Her mind raced, scrambling through the fog of trauma and grief. She remembered the frantic call from the hospital, the sterile smell of the emergency room, the devastating finality of the doctor's words. She remembered the news reports, the legal proceedings, the whispers at the funeral. There was another car, another victim, a woman. She had died, too. The police report had stated Richard was at fault. He'd run a red light. They said he'd had a medical event, a sudden, massive heart attack just moments before the impact. It wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation. A reason. It was something she had clung to, a way to frame the tragedy as a cruel act of fate rather than a malicious act of negligence. But the other victim, she had been a name on a page, a statistic in a tragedy that had consumed her own life. Isabella had never allowed herself to think of her as a person with a family, with a life, with someone who loved her. To do so would have been to open a door to a room of guilt and horror she could not bear to enter. Now, the husband of that woman was sitting right next to her on a park bench, his face a testament to the devastation her husband had caused. "Your wife," Isabella breathed, the words catching in her throat. Her name was Sarah. Leo flinched as if she had struck him. Hearing Sarah's name on her lips felt like a desecration. He just nodded, unable to speak, his throat closing up around the lump of unshed tears. "Oh my God," Isabella whispered, a hand flying to her mouth. The mystery of his coldness, his pain, his rejection, it all made a sudden, terrible sense. He wasn't just a kind stranger. He was the other half of her tragedy, the man whose world had been shattered by the same event that had shattered hers. She looked at him, truly seeing him now, not as an enigma but as a fellow survivor. She saw the deep lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the threadbare cuff of his shirt, the profound loneliness that clung to him like a second skin. And she felt a wave of shame so powerful it nearly buckled her. In her own grief, in the bubble of wealth that had insulated her from the harsher consequences, she had never once considered the life of the man Sarah had left behind. I am so sorry," she said, the words feeling pitifully inadequate, like trying to patch a gaping wound with a tiny bandage. "I had no idea. How could you?" Leo's voice was devoid of accusation, filled only with a hollow resignation. "You were the grieving widow of the wealthy executive. I was just the other guy, the collateral damage." The bitterness in his voice was sharp, but it wasn't directed at her. It was directed at the world, at fate, at the cruel unfairness of it all. He had been invisible in his own tragedy. They sat in a heavy, suffocating silence, the weight of their shared history pressing down on them. Across the grass, their children were oblivious, laughing as they chased the soccer ball. Lily tripped and fell, scraping her knee. Before Isabella could even stand up, Noah was there, helping her to her feet, his small face a mask of concern. He brushed the dirt off her knees with a clumsy gentleness that was a perfect imitation of his father's. The sight was both beautiful and agonizing. Their children, innocent of the tragic legacy that connected them, were forming a bond of pure, uncomplicated friendship. "What you did for Lily," Isabella started, her voice thick. "Even after knowing who I was, who she was a lost little girl in the rain," Leo said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "She had nothing to do with it. Neither does my son." He finally looked at her, and the anger in his eyes had been replaced by a vast, oceanic sadness. "This is a nightmare." "I know," she whispered. She looked at their children, now sitting together in the grass, Lily showing Noah a special rock she had found. "What do we do?" It was a genuine question. What was the protocol for this? How do two people, bound by the worst day of their lives, move forward when their children have decided to become friends? Leo had no answer. For 2 years, he had harbored a quiet, simmering resentment for the name Sterling. It was a faceless anger, directed at the injustice of it all. But now, that anger had a face. And it was the face of a woman who looked just as broken as he felt. It was the face of a mother whose daughter brought his son a rare and precious joy. The complexity of it was overwhelming. He felt like he was drowning. He stood up abruptly. "I have to go," he said, his voice strained. "Noah, it's time to go home." Noah's face fell. "But Papa, we just got here." Lily and I are building a fairy house. Now, Noah, Leo said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Isabella stood up as well, her heart pounding. She couldn't let it end like this. She couldn't let him walk away and leave this chasm of unresolved pain between them. Leo, wait, she said, her voice pleading. Please, don't go. Can we just talk? For 5 minutes? Leo hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to retreat back into the familiar fortress of his grief where things were simpler, where his anger was pure and uncomplicated. But then he looked at Noah's disappointed face, and at Lily's, which was already starting to crumple. He looked at Isabella, whose eyes were begging him for a chance, for a sliver of grace. And he knew, with a weary sigh that seemed to come from the very bottom of his soul, that running was no longer an option. The past had caught up to him, and it was sitting on a park bench, asking to talk. Leo didn't return to the bench. He couldn't. It felt too intimate, too close. Instead, he walked to the edge of the playground, leaning against the chain-link fence that separated the scruffy park from the bustling street beyond. He watched the cars go by, each one a potential vessel of tragedy, a reminder of how quickly a life could be extinguished. Isabella followed him, keeping a respectful distance. She understood his need for space, for a barrier. The children, sensing the shift in the adult mood, quieted their play, occasionally glancing over at their parents with worried eyes. What do you want to talk about? Leo asked, his voice rough. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on the traffic. I don't know, Isabella admitted, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know what to say. Sorry feels like an insult. There are no words for this. I want you to know that I am so deeply, profoundly sorry for the pain my husband caused you, for the life he took from you. Leo was silent for a long time. He absorbed her words, letting them settle. It was the first time anyone from that other life, the Sterling life, had ever acknowledged his existence, his pain. It was a small thing, but it felt monumental. They said it was a heart attack, he said, his voice flat. It wasn't a question, but a statement he needed her to confirm. Yes, she said softly. The doctors, the report, they said it was massive. Instantaneous. He was likely gone before the impact. She had repeated this fact to herself 1,000 times, a mantra to ward off the guilt. Richard hadn't been drunk. He hadn't been reckless. His body had simply betrayed him at the worst possible moment. Leo finally turned to look at her. The anger was gone, replaced by a raw, aching vulnerability that was startling to witness. Her name was Sarah, he said, and this time, saying the name was not a flinch, but an offering. A piece of his shattered heart held out for her to see. We were high school sweethearts. She was a preschool teacher. She loved sunflowers and the smell of old books. She was everything. We were trying for another baby. He spoke in short, clipped sentences, as if each detail was a precious, painful jewel he was pulling from a locked box. She was on her way to pick up a crib we'd found online. A second-hand one. We couldn't afford new. The detail about the second-hand crib hung in the air between them, a stark illustration of the chasm that had separated their two worlds even before the accident. Isabella's husband had been a titan of industry. They had never worried about the cost of a crib. The injustice of it all washed over Isabella anew, but this time it was accompanied by a profound and humbling empathy. She didn't offer platitudes. She didn't say she's in a better place or time heals all wounds. She knew better. Instead, she offered him the only thing she had that was of equal value to his pain, her own. His name was Richard, she said, her voice a near whisper. He wasn't an easy man to love. He was driven, ambitious, consumed by his work. He was distant, especially in that last year. He was stressed, unhappy. He traveled constantly. Lily barely knew him. She looked over at her daughter, who was now sitting quietly beside Noah, showing him the contents of her pockets. The day of the accident, we'd had a fight that morning. A stupid fight. About him missing her ballet recital. The last thing I ever said to him was angry. I've lived with that every single day for 2 years. The confession fell from her lips, a secret shame she had never voiced to another soul. In that moment, they were no longer the perpetrator's wife and the victim's husband. They were just two people, a man and a woman, who had both lost their partners in the same violent, senseless moment. They were two single parents struggling to raise their children in the shadow of a shared tragedy. They were two lonely souls adrift on the same sea of grief. Leo listened, and for the first time, he saw her not as Isabella Sterling, the wealthy widow, but as Isabella, a woman who was just as haunted as he was. Her pain was different from his, shaped by different circumstances and regrets, but it was just as real, just as deep. A strange, fragile bridge of understanding began to form between them, built on the rubble of their shattered lives. It was not forgiveness. It was not friendship. It was something more elemental. It was recognition. He really saw her, and she saw him. The children, as if sensing the delicate truce, wandered over. Lily held up a small, smooth gray stone. "Look, Mommy," she said. "Noah says it's a magic wishing stone." Isabella knelt and took the stone, her fingers closing around its coolness. "It's beautiful, sweetie." Noah looked up at his father. "Papa, can Lily and her mommy come over for dinner? I can share my pasta." The innocent, hopeful question hung in the air, a terrifying, beautiful proposition. Leo looked at Isabella, whose eyes were wide with a silent, mirrored panic. Dinner. Together. It was unthinkable. But as he looked at his son's hopeful face, and at the small, lost girl who had somehow wandered into his life and cracked open his frozen heart, he heard a voice inside him, a voice that sounded a lot like Sarah's. Whisper, say yes. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "Okay, buddy," he said, the word feeling foreign and monumental on his tongue. Yes, they can come for dinner. The decision to have dinner together felt both insane and inevitable. As Leo and Noah walked the short distance back to their apartment, a nervous, electric energy buzzed around Leo. He was a mess of contradictions. A part of him was screaming in protest, recoiling from the idea of willingly inviting the embodiment of his tragedy into his home, into the space that was his last sanctuary with Sarah's memory. But another, quieter part of him felt a flicker of something he couldn't name. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was more like curiosity, a desire to see what would happen next in this impossible story. Isabella and Lily followed a few minutes later, having gone to a small local market to pick up a few things. Isabella had insisted, framing it as a contribution to the meal, but Leo knew it was more than that. It was an attempt to balance the scales, to ease the awkwardness, to enter his home not as a wealthy benefactor, but as a guest bearing a humble offering. She arrived with a bag containing a fresh salad, a loaf of crusty bread, and a carton of fancy ice cream. The gesture was simple, thoughtful, and it disarmed him slightly. The apartment, which had felt like a safe haven just hours before, now seemed painfully small and shabby under the imagined scrutiny of Isabella's wealth. Leo found himself seeing it through her eyes. The crack in the ceiling, the persistent drip of the kitchen faucet, the threadbare patch on the arm of the sofa. He felt a hot flush of shame, an emotion he rarely allowed himself. He was a proud man, and his poverty was a private struggle, not something he wanted on display. But then the children, oblivious to the undercurrents of class and grief, took over. Noah proudly showed Lily his collection of mismatched toy cars, and soon the floor of the living room was transformed into a miniature city, complete with crayon-drawn roads and block towers. The sound of their happy, imaginative play began to fill the space, pushing back against the heavy silence. In the tiny kitchen, Leo and Isabella moved around each other with a careful, awkward choreography. He boiled the pasta while she tossed the salad. They worked in near silence, the only sounds the clatter of utensils and the bubbling of water on the stove. It should have been unbearable, but it wasn't. There was a strange comfort in the shared, domestic task. It was normal. It was something two parents might do. "I haven't cooked with anyone in a long time," Isabella said quietly, her back to him as she sliced a cucumber with practiced precision. "My housekeeper, Maria, handles everything. The kitchen in my house is enormous, and I never use it." "This one's not enormous," Leo said with a wry, self-deprecating smile. "But it gets the job done. It feels lived in," she replied, and he could hear the wistful note in her voice. "My house doesn't feel lived in. It feels like a museum nobody visits." The meal was simple: pasta with canned tomato sauce, a fresh salad, and warm bread. They ate at the small, wobbly kitchen table, the four of them squeezed together. The children chattered endlessly, their conversation flitting from dinosaurs to school to the merits of different ice cream flavors. They were the buffer, the bridge, the reason this impossible dinner was even happening. Lily, her face smeared with tomato sauce, looked at Leo. "Mr. Leo, your pasta is yummy." "Thank you, Lily," he said, a genuine smile reaching his eyes for the first time all evening. "Noah's my sous chef. He helps stir." Noah beamed with pride. "I'm the best stirrer." As they ate, Leo found himself watching Isabella. She didn't flinch at the simple meal or the chipped plates. She ate with genuine appreciation, listening intently to the children's stories, laughing at their silly jokes. He saw the way her shoulders, which were usually so tense and straight, had relaxed. He saw the tired lines around her eyes soften. He was seeing the woman, not the symbol. After dinner, while the children moved back to their car city on the floor, Leo and Isabella cleared the table. It was Isabella who broached the subject that hung unspoken between them. "I looked you up," she confessed, her voice low as she rinsed a plate under the dripping faucet. "After I left the park. I hope that wasn't an invasion of your privacy." Leo tensed, but he just shook his head. "What did you find?" "Not much," she said. "A wedding announcement. An obituary for Sarah. It said she was a teacher." "She was," Leo said, his voice thick. "At the little preschool down the street. The kids adored her. She had this way of making every single one of them feel like they were the most important person in the world." "Lily's in preschool now," Isabella said softly. "She loves it." They stood in silence for a moment, the shared reality of their children's lives a powerful, undeniable connection. Then, Isabella did something that stunned him. She reached out and gently touched his arm. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a gesture of pure, human solidarity. "Leo," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You've been carrying all of this alone, haven't you? The grief, raising Noah, the financial struggles, it's all there on your face. You don't have to. Carry it all alone, I mean." Her words, her touch, the genuine compassion in her eyes, it was too much. The carefully constructed dam he had built around his heart, the one that had held back 2 years of unspeakable pain, anger, and loneliness, finally broke. He didn't sob or cry out. He just stood there, his shoulders slumping, and a single tear traced a path down his weathered cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He let her see it. He let her see the crack in his armor, the raw wound underneath. It was the most vulnerable he had been with another person since the day Sarah died. And in that moment of shared, silent understanding, something new and fragile began to grow in the ruins of their past. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was something that had to come first. It was grace. The months that followed that first, tentative dinner were a slow, careful dance of healing. There was no sudden, miraculous cure for their grief, no easy erasure of the past. Instead, their lives began to quietly, cautiously intertwine, guided by the unwavering gravitational pull of their children's friendship. It started with park playdates. Then it evolved. Isabella would invite Leo and Noah over to her vast, empty mansion for a swim in the pool. At first, Leo felt deeply uncomfortable, a trespasser in a world of unimaginable luxury. But seeing Noah's unadulterated joy as he splashed in the crystal-clear water, hearing his laughter echo in a space that was usually so silent, began to chip away at his unease. In return, Leo would have them over for simple backyard barbecues, using a small, rusty grill he'd inherited from his father. He would teach Lily how to toast marshmallows until they were perfectly golden brown, and Isabella would watch, a soft, wistful smile on her face, as he treated her daughter with the same gentle, paternal care he gave his own son. They discovered they were a good team. Leo could fix anything: a leaky faucet in Isabella's guest bathroom, a wobbly leg on Lily's bicycle. Isabella, in turn, used her resources and connections in ways that were subtle and respectful. She never offered him money directly again, but one day a brand-new, top-of-the-line refrigerator was delivered to his apartment, a gift from a promotional giveaway she had won. Another time, she mentioned a construction foreman she knew who was looking for a reliable, permanent site manager. The job came with a significant raise and, more importantly, stability. Leo knew she was behind it, but he accepted the help. He was learning that accepting help was not a sign of weakness, but a form of connection. They talked. They started to truly talk, not just about the past, but about the present. They would sit on her pristine patio while the children played, or on his worn-out sofa after the kids were asleep, and they would share the small, daily struggles of single parenthood. He confessed his fear that he wasn't enough for Noah, that he couldn't fill the void Sarah had left. She confessed her own terror, her feeling of being an imposter, a mother who had all the resources in the world but still felt utterly lost and alone. They were building a new kind of family, a found family, forged in the crucible of shared tragedy. It wasn't romantic. The ghosts of their spouses were still too present for that. It was something deeper, more fundamental. It was a partnership of survival. They were two broken halves that, when put together, created a semblance of wholeness for their children. The true turning point came on the 3rd anniversary of the accident. It was a day both of them had been dreading. Isabella called him that morning, her voice small and shaky. "I can't do it alone today," she confessed. Can we? "I'll be right over," he said without hesitation. He found her in her cavernous living room, surrounded by photo albums of Richard. She was crying, not for the man she had lost, but for the man she had never truly known, for the life they had failed to build together. Leo didn't offer empty platitudes. He just sat with her in the silence, a quiet, steady presence. Later that day, she went with him to the cemetery. It was the first time she had ever visited Sarah's grave. She stood a respectful distance away as Leo placed a small bouquet of sunflowers on the simple headstone. He talked to Sarah, his voice low, telling her about Noah, about his new job, about Lily and Isabella. He told her he was trying, that he was so tired, but that he was trying. When he was done, he turned and saw Isabella standing there, tears streaming down her face. "She was beautiful," Isabella said, looking at the small photo on the headstone. "Yes," Leo said, his heart aching with a familiar mix of love and loss. She was. In that moment, at the graveside of the woman whose death had both divided and united them, they finally let go of the last vestiges of anger and blame. All that was left was a shared, profound sorrow, and a shared, profound gratitude for the children who were their reason for moving forward. A few months later, it was Noah's 7th birthday. They decided to have a party in the same scruffy park where their new story had truly begun. Isabella had organized everything, but the party itself was simple, just as Leo had requested. There was a cake, some balloons, and a small group of Noah's friends from school. Leo stood by the barbecue, flipping burgers, a genuine, easy smile on his face. He looked up and saw a scene that would have been unimaginable a year ago. Isabella was orchestrating a game of tag, her laughter bright and uninhibited. Lily and Noah, heads bent together, were whispering secrets like the siblings they had effectively become. The sun was shining, the air was filled with the sounds of children's joy, and for the first time in a very long time, Leo's heart felt not just patched, but full. Isabella caught his eye from across the lawn and gave him a warm, radiant smile. It was a smile of shared understanding, of shared history, of a shared future they were building together, one day at a time. The scars were still there, on both of them. They would always be there, but they were no longer gaping wounds. They were reminders of a great loss, but also of a great, improbable, and beautiful discovery. That even in the darkest of rains, a single act of kindness can lead you home, and that sometimes, the family you find is the one that truly saves you. You know, life has a funny way of testing us. It can throw storms our way that feel impossible to weather, storms that leave us feeling broken, lost, and completely alone. It's in those moments, when we're at our lowest, that we have a choice. We can retreat, build walls around our hearts, and let the bitterness take root. Or, we can choose kindness. We can choose to reach out a hand to someone else who is lost in the rain, even when we're soaked to the bone ourselves. This story is a powerful reminder that our deepest wounds can sometimes become the bridges that connect us to others. Leo and Isabella were bound by a tragedy that should have made them enemies forever. But through an act of simple, human decency, they found something extraordinary. They found that in sharing their pain, they could also share their healing. They discovered that forgiveness isn't always about forgetting. Sometimes, it's about choosing to build a new future together, one that honors the past but isn't imprisoned by it. They created a found family, a beautiful mosaic made from the broken pieces of their lives, proving that the strongest bonds are often forged in the most unlikely of circumstances. So what's the lesson for us? It's that you never know what battles the person next to you is fighting. A little compassion, a moment of grace, can change a life. It reminds us that even after the most devastating storm, the sun can and will shine again, especially when we help each other find the light. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspirational stories that remind us of the incredible power of the human spirit. Thank you for watching, and remember, be the reason someone believes in the goodness of people.